know what you're telling them is true. And you know that they probably know that what you're saying is true, but darn it, they're just not going to face that what you're saying is true. What's going on there? Let's talk about that. How you doing? I'm Joe Dallas. This is Sound Doctrine Bites, and we're in the middle of a 7-part series, 7 lessons every helper needs to learn. If you're a helper, you're somebody involved with people. By the grace of God, you're either, as a Christian, sharing the gospel with people who need to be brought to life, they need to be born again, or you're maybe mentoring a brother or a sister, sharing truth with a family member, trying to build somebody up, just trying to be a part of what God's doing in somebody's life. And wow, that's a joy, right? I mean, we want to have impact. We want to be used. And we realize on the one hand, we are not the answer. We're the instrument, but we also realize God has designed it that members of the body be there for each other. That's what you want to do. You want to do it effectively. Well, there are some hard-won lessons that we got to learn along the way. We've gone through 3 already. One is that you don't create, you facilitate. You are not the process. You are a part of the process. You didn't begin it. You don't sustain it. You won't complete it. Second lesson, safety first, then experience, then direction. You want to provide safety by being a respectful person who empathizes and listens. And then you want to draw from your own experience and share it and use it. And then you want to offer direction based primarily on the Word of God, enhanced by what else you've experienced or what you've learned. Last week, we also looked at the honesty factor. Lesson number 3, honesty is an acquired taste. It doesn't come naturally. I don't believe honesty comes naturally to any of us. Leave all of us sinners to our own devices, and we're going to lie like crazy. We do it from childhood well into our adulthood, except by the grace of God when we get interrupted and transformed. But that leads to an important point that I want to cover with you today, lesson number 4, and that is they'll hear what they're ready to hear. They'll hear what they're ready to hear. Speaking of honesty, we want to face the truth about ourselves. We want to know the truth. We want to help bring people to the truth. Why aren't they hearing the truth? I remember a long time ago, I used to listen to a radio psychologist named Dr. Tony Grant. Yeah, I'm aging myself. Some of you might remember Dr. Grant. She was popular, in the 70s and the early 80s. And interesting woman, had some good ideas, not coming from a Christian perspective, but still pretty practical stuff she would pass on to her listeners. One thing she said that stuck with me, she said, people don't hear what they're not ready to hear. And at first I thought, wow, you're a cynical so-and-so, aren't you? What do you mean people don't hear what they're not ready to hear? If it's the truth, they're going to hear it. No, they won't. I've come to think that she's right, I think here's how it goes. People mentally recognize truth to a point, okay? They usually do. Like people will recognize the truth that, say, if they're overeating, that's not good for you. They realize that. If they're smoking cigarettes, that's not good for you. They realize that. If they're gossiping, that is not a good thing. They realize that. But they're still giving themselves permission to do it. Why? Because what they've got going is recognition without willingness. There's recognition. I recognize the truth, but I'm not willing to submit myself to the truth. I'm not willing to obey it. I'm not willing to act on it. I am only willing to recognize it. Well, recognition without willingness leads to impasse. That's where you sometimes get with people. You know you're speaking the truth. They probably recognize it, but they're not willing to face it or to do anything about it. Well, that's because lies are comfortable. They are. I mean, the lies that we come to believe are like a security blanket we wrap around ourselves. A lot of people are very comfortable in their own victimhood, for example. I'm a victim. I've been abused, which may be true. I've been marginalized, which may be true. I've been mistreated, may be true. Maybe you're inflating it, or maybe it's historically true. I don't know. But what we come to believe is, and therefore that's where I need to remain. I'm comfortable with that lie because I'm entitled now because I'm a victim. That's a pretty common lie. Cults are a good example of how this works. Any cult that you can think of, real notorious cult, the Jim Jones cult, the Robert Applegate, or the Reverend Moon, Charles Manson, any of these guys, they ran their cults, and the people in the cults believed lies. And here's how it usually worked. The person would believe the lie. Oh, this person is the Messiah. I will follow him because this is the Messiah. Okay. And as a result of my following him and recognizing he's the Messiah, I'm part of a special group. Every cult has that going on, those two things. The leader is messianic and the group is elite. Oh, he's the Messiah and we're special. It's a pretty nice lie. What's the payoff? Abdication and vanity. The payoff on the one hand is abdication. If this person is the Messiah and I just blindly follow him, I abdicate all responsibility for my own behavior. I don't have to work for a living. I don't have to make up my own mind. I don't have to think for myself. I don't need to engage in any kind of free enterprise. Why? Because everything goes to him. I just follow him. I abdicate all personal responsibility, and I get to be vain about it. I'm part of the elite. We are special. We have our built-in community with a purpose. We're going to save the world. That always goes along with cult-like thinking, okay? Now, the truth about what that person is doing, that's going to really threaten their personal comfort, right? Because if somebody comes along and says, can't you see that that nut job is not the Messiah and you're making an idiot out of yourself? Nope. Nope. Because if I face that, my whole world is going to crumble. So the truth, the truth is liberating, but man, the truth can be a threat. So John 3:19 says it very nicely. This is the condemnation. Light came into the world, and men hated the light because they loved the darkness. People love their darkness. And it's interesting. I think even when people love their lies, at some level, they know they should seek the truth. And that's why a lot of people will allow for a limited truth, but resist the uncomfortable truth. I see this a lot in counseling. Say, for example, a man comes in and he's struggling with homosexuality. He's a Christian. He knows it would be a sin to give in to those tendencies. So he goes, okay, what do I do about that? This is the way I feel. This is what I want to do, but this is what I know I shouldn't do. And I have been giving into it. I've been watching gay porn, say, or I've been hooking up with guys. So he comes in and he will allow for a limited truth. That is a sin. That sexual behavior is a sin. Okay, I get it, Joe. I allow for that limited truth. Now let's start digging into what's behind that behavior a little bit. And sometimes different male figures in that person's life will come out. My dad, my brother, my teacher, guys that bullied me, or who knows what. Just for example. And so the person will allow a limited truth. Yeah, that was probably bad, and that probably has played into me having difficulty relating in a normal way to men. Okay, you're allowing for some limited truth. You recognize the sin. You recognize some of the wounding behind the sin. Now let's look at what you did in response to that wounding. What you did in response to that wounding was, let's face it, rebellious. Not rebellious in that you have those feelings, but rebellious in that you as a Christian gave into them. Well, wait a minute. How can it be rebellious? What else could I do? I mean, I don't really see myself as being all that. What, are you insinuating that I'm narcissistic? Well, that's an uncomfortable truth. Not going to allow for that. I'll allow for a limited truth, the guy will say, but I won't allow, or I should say, I will resist the uncomfortable truth. See what I mean? It's almost like the lies we develop are layers that have to be peeled back, and people will only let you peel off so much. So you notice this guy I just described, he does embrace some truth, and he's open to a little more, but not too much. And I got to admit, as somebody who's had to deal with a lot of sin in his own life, I get it. I mean, I was willing to face the sin. Yes, that behavior is sinful. And yes, some of the things that led to that behavior, those are really problematic. But my own self-idolatry, it would take a while before I recognized, it all started when I lied to myself and I said, Joe Dallas is God. I get to do whatever I want, my entitlement. That was a core issue that would take a long time to really get to. I could confess a lot of other sins before I confessed that one. And I think, again, this is true of us in general. We don't just automatically default to honesty. We default to resisting honesty, and we take it in layers and we hear what we're ready to hear. That doesn't mean that our unwillingness to hear it is not a sin. It is a sin. I'm only saying that usually it takes some time before we reach a point of enlightenment and integrity where we realize there are layers of lies I've believed about myself. So initially, the truth is threatening. The truth is the threat, And then maybe our heart softens a little and the truth becomes an option, one of many. Now, just for example, when Paul was testifying before Agrippa was a man giving himself over to a lot of sensual pleasure, real libertine kind of a guy. And Paul is reasoning with him. and talking about things that are probably uncomfortable to a point to Agrippa, and finally Agrippa reaches a point of going, you almost persuade me to be a Christian. I'm considering more and more uncomfortable truth. Well, that's a better level than someone who just completely resists truth. It's not quite where you want someone to be, but that speaks of the process of someone who's at least reconsidering the lies that he has believed about himself. It's funny how we operate. We will recognize truth, and then we deal with what we call nice lies, and then we avoid what we call terrible lies. I might tell myself that, yeah, I sin, I speed on the freeway when I shouldn't, but that doesn't mean that I'm essentially a self-centered jerk who should pay more attention to the way he treats people. Those are different levels of truth that I need to face, and some are more comfortable than others. So oftentimes when you're counseling people, mentoring people, ministering to people, there is the truth they are willing to admit. Then there's a truth that they're willing to consider. It's been threatening, but they're to the point of considering it. So it's at least an option. It's one of many, but it's still like they're looking at the menu saying, well, am I going to choose the truth? Or am I going to choose a modified form of the truth? And am I going to choose what I would call nice lies or white lies? There's no such thing, but whatever. And then finally, by the grace of God, we reach a point where the truth is not an option. The truth is the option, the only option. And that's when the unraveling really comes to fruition. We start by believing the lie. Then we reconsider the lie and we consider truth that we can handle at a certain point. Yeah, this is a sin. Okay, I get it. We deal with that. Then we deal a little deeper. Oh, there is a character issue behind that behavioral sin I've been committing. Okay, I'll deal with that. Now there is a core issue. Wait a minute, don't go too far, buddy. And then finally, by the grace of God, something happens that forces us to realize that truth is not an option. It is the only option if I'm going to really live. Now, Peter reached this point at a crisis point in his own life, his own discipleship. There was a truth that Jesus didn't articulate until later in his ministry with Peter and the other disciples when he said, without me, you can do nothing. But this was a truth that was born in that famous episode where Peter walked on water. What was happening there? The disciples were living obediently. They were obeying the truth. A storm came up that was absolutely life-threatening. And Peter reached a point where he realized, wow, the only option I have left is to recognize that in order to survive, I must try the impossible with my eyes fixed on Jesus. Now think about that, would you? It's so often true that there are truths about ourselves we avoid until, by the grace of God, our lives are made impossible unless we face that truth. There are a lot of ways that can happen. But when it does happen, we realize that truth about myself that I have not wanted to face, it is no longer an option, it is the option. That's the truth of, say, a man who's been smoking and drinking too much and is severely overweight and finally has a heart attack and realizes, oh, before I faced a limited truth that it's probably not good that I have such bad personal habits, but now I realize the only option I have is to face the truth. These are lethal habits. So the truth is no longer an option. I had the option before of either dealing with the truth and turning away from my bad habits, or continuing my bad habits in a modified form, or ignoring how bad my habits are. Those were all options. The truth was only one of them. Now the truth is the only option. If I don't deal with the truth, I will die. That's the point Peter reached. And oftentimes, I think you'll find that's the point God will bring someone to who you're working with as they reach, by the grace of God, either through internal or external crisis, they reach a point of realizing the truth I have not been wanting to face. Well, now facing it is the only option. And that's when Peter realized, if I don't try to do what I have previously never been able to do, I will die. Therefore, fixing my eyes on you, I pursue you. The storm has reached that point. That hard truth is my only option. And with that hard-won truth, and it is a hard-won truth, you come to a wonderful realization. Like Peter did, he steps out of the boat and he realizes, wow, what I could not do before I can do with my eyes fixed on Jesus, and that's how I survive? Well, I've had to reach that point. I'll bet you have too. And we try to bring other people to it. And we try to, by the grace of God, keep coming back to it ourselves when we realize the vanities I've believed, the habits I've had, The difficulties that I've dealt with in life, I cannot deal with them on their own. And yet I'm still called by God to deal with them. What the heck am I going to do? I have to abide in him and trust in his power and find in that, now I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And you know what happens then? I realize the truth is not the problem. The truth is the solution. Wow. There is a level of freedom. Now, what's your part in all of that? You're working with someone who has a hard time facing the truth. You keep saying the truth, they keep resisting the truth, and you feel like, am I saying it in the wrong way? Are they just reprobate? Should I give up on the whole thing? No, no, no. Your job, number one, repetitive respect. Repetitive respect. You show the respect on the one hand of saying, I see how this can be hard. I want you to face the truth that at core level, you've developed very selfish tendencies. I know some bad things have happened to you. I know it's been hard to break the habits you've had in response to that, but let's look at the core issue. You made decisions that were wrong. Now, I respect the fact that that can be hard to face. I do, because I've had to face that type of thing myself. It's not an easy thing to do, but what I found is that until I faced it, I could never really be free, and I want that freedom for you. Repetitive respect. I show my respect, but I keep repeating the truth. What is the truth? This is what I see. This is what he says. Those are two important truths. When you're working with someone, mentoring, counseling, being a part of ministry to their life, you've got to say what you see. This is what appears to me to be true. And then even more important, in light of what I see, this is what he says. This is what the Word of God says. Does it get tiring? Sure it does. You know it does. Hey, you and I aren't fast learners either, are we? I know I'm sure not. But you want to keep in mind the fact that, hey, I am investing in truth and in gently calling this person to hear the truth. And I realize people will not hear what they're not ready to hear, but they will hear the truth when they're ready. And by the grace of God, let's trust that they will be ready. That's what Paul meant when he said, Galatians 6:9, let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we will reap if we faint not. And that's the truth. Hey, it's good getting to talk with you for a few minutes. If you would like to offer any comments, suggestions, criticisms, questions, hey, just leave me a note in the comments section there. I'll be glad to get back to you. If you haven't yet liked this Facebook page, would you please do so? Also, please check out my podcast, Christians in a Cancel Culture. It's on every Friday on YouTube. Have a listen to that. If you like it, please subscribe. Also, if you'd like to support our ministry here, Cloudfire Ministries, we'd love to keep providing this free content. Just go to joedallas.com/give, joedallas.com/giving, I should say, excuse me. And we'd love to have you partner with us in this ministry. Well, this is Sound Doctrine Bites. We're here every Wednesday, 12 noon Pacific Standard Time. Look forward to seeing you next week as we continue this series, 7 Lessons Every Helper Needs to Learn. Meanwhile, let's keep in mind those 2 critical questions asked by Paul, first as Saul. Lord, what would you have me do? Well, what saith the Scripture? And there's your answer. Good talking with you. God bless.